What we are all here for today is once a year we have a discussion around HeForShe. It is a program through the United Nations that was launched to basically start conversations and utilize partnership with men for women's equity. And so we at Women of Toledo are bringing this program to our own area. So I'm really excited for this conversation today, specifically given the background of what we are living every day with COVID and with economic difficulties that are being called a she session by many because I don't know if I want to say burdens, but the responsibilities of what COVID is bringing to us and having to manage with our home lives is falling on women more so than men and pulling them out of the workforce. So our discussion today about how men in our community can really support women that they work with is really timely and very impactful. So maybe we can move to the agenda slide of what we'll be going through today. I'm going to have two more introductions and then we will move to the programming with our three esteemed panelists. They will give you a little bit of their backgrounds and why this topic is really critical and important to them. We will also have an opportunity for Q&A. So if you have a question as they're going through topics, or if you came into this discussion with a question, please add it in the chat box. If you scroll to the bottom of your screen, towards the middle, you can see chat. You just click on that and we will see your question come in and we will feed it to our moderator to bring that up for discussion. And then we hope to have some time at the very end just to summarize our call to actions and close out the event. So the next introduction is with an organization called the Matriots. They are our program partner for this event today. So I'm going to introduce Kim Crowfoot-Swade to talk a little bit about the Matriots if you're not familiar with them.
Thank you so much, Sabrina and Nina and Christina. And I want to tell you how honored we have been this year to be program partners with Women of Toledo, to get to know this organization, to help the programming go forward has just been wonderful. We are very excited about everything that's happening in Toledo. If you're not familiar with the Matriots, you may have seen an article in the Toledo Blade. I just posted it up from September, where the Toledo Blade really did a great job, we thought, of describing what the Matriots is all about. We are a non-partisan state PAC. So we are a state level political action committee. Our goal is to have 50% of women in office here in Ohio by 2028. So it's a bold goal, it's a big goal. And part of the reason it's so difficult is if you look at some of the original research we put together, and I'm just sharing it on the screen, I hope you can see that. You know, when we started the Political Action Committee 3 years ago, it was because there's just not enough women in office. And as you can see from here, we have about 29% of elected officials who are actually women across all levels of government here in Ohio. But women are over 50% of the population here in Ohio. So we're just not represented. And there are 17,412 elected seats from, you know, governor on down to municipalities and school boards. If you look at our representation, it is completely inadequate. And then when we start thinking about, you know, as we're calling the she session, the current pandemic, et cetera, as we look at policies that affect our lives, women don't have a seat at the table where those policies are being made. And so the Matriots is committed to endorsing and supporting women in office. So we have 64 women who are currently being supported by us in the general election. And we've given them money, we give them support, we do everything we can to get them into office. Our success rate is 59%, which is incredible because we also don't just support incumbents. We support rising stars, we support women that we think are going to impact Ohio politics for the long term in the future. And we give generously, and then we reinvest. in our candidates if they're in a tough race. And a couple of years back, our reinvestment, one of the races was run by 56 votes. And we reinvested and we got yard signs out there for that candidate. So we are, I'm just going to leave you, since I know you have a lot going on today. I want to show you our slate because we also are absolutely committed to, let's bring it up here, inclusion. We think that the electorate should be reflected by the people who are representing them in office. And so we feel strongly that we need to have women from all demographic backgrounds. We need to have women from all life experience, from all walks of life. We need women all across the state who are committed to making change. So that's the story of the Matriots. And we've been very successful, and we're very proud of that success. And we're looking forward to having 64 more Matriots in office come November 3rd. So thank you, Women of Toledo, for inviting us. Thank you for allowing us to partner with you. And if you have any questions, it's matriotsohio.com.
Thanks, Kim. That is phenomenal. I think, Nina, we will share that list for consideration, after the meeting to those who are attending. I know I definitely want to take a look at it to get informed of who will be on my ballot. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator for this session, who I am particularly excited and honored to have work with us at Women of Toledo. It's Leah McGuire. She is the Vice President of Inclusion and Diversity at Owens Corning. So I get to benefit every day from the amazing work that she is doing to drive a culture of appreciation at Owens Corning. I actually spent 2 hours on a call this morning on a D&I meeting with a broader team that I am becoming a part of. And it was, you can just see even every day the discussions that you're driving and the programming is really, really impactful. So thank you for what you do, Leah, and thank you for moderating today.
Thank you. I'm really, really pleased to be here and to be with this community of women to talk about HeForShe, the UN solidarity movement. It's something that I've paid attention to year over year, and I always get that shot in the arm when you see things on social media of prominent men posting HeForShe, talking about the influence of women in their lives and what they're doing to help promote and help them progress in their careers and raising life issues. Allies are a good thing to have. I recognize that in this context. I've recognized it more significantly after the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd this spring. And so the concept of allyship, and that really is what we're talking about, has never been more important, that we need to be allies to each other in so many different ways. And I'm really thrilled to be here talking about HeForShe. And we've got a wonderful panel of speakers, men who are going to talk about what this means for them, what they do in their professional lives and their personal lives, and why this is so important to them. So I'm going to go through the bios of our speakers, and then I'm going to give them an opportunity to just speak to this audience one at a time, and then we will come back with questions. I'm going to ask folks to stay on mute rather than voice your questions, but put them in the chat box. I will try and monitor, but I also have help from Sabrina, who will be monitoring the chat, and we will get to your question, and we will cover them at the end. So thanks for spending time with us today. And I'm going to start with Brad Rieger. Brad is the Chief Operating Officer at Cooper Smith, which is a full-service marketing and advertising agency that specializes in media planning, media buying, and other creative. They have an office in Sylvania and also in Stamford, Connecticut. You may all be more familiar with Brad from his 31-year career in education, most notably superintendent of Sylvania schools from 2013 to 2015. He continues his involvement in the community as a board member on Lourdes University, for CASA, Bethany House, very notably, and I think we're going to hear more about that. And he continues to be active in education and social justice. Brad is married to Laura, and they've been married for 32 years, and they have two adult daughters. We asked each speaker to give us a quote that's meaningful for them, and here is Dr. Riegers. I am one of the millions who strongly embrace the perspective, talents, and influence women bring to the table. Men in leadership positions play a vital role in fostering an inclusive, respectful environment, ensuring that female colleagues feel supported and valued. Mentoring and encouraging women to seek growth experiences and high-profile opportunities is another way that we can promote empowerment. Through their actions and words, men can be staunch allies to women in an important quest for equality. Dr. McArthur was named the University of Toledo's Vice President for Diversity in June of 2016. Before that, he was Associate Dean in the College of Arts and Letters. He remains an Associate Professor of Anthropology in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. His areas of research include African American migration, as well as business and urban anthropology, a strong focus on student retention and school culture, of course. His bachelor's degree is from Grand Valley State University, a master's degree in business administration from Saginaw Valley State University, and a Master of Arts in labor and industrial relations, as well as a doctoral degree in business anthropology from Wayne State University, which is where I attended law school, by the way. Dr. McArthur is a founding member of Brothers on the Rise, which is a retention and mentoring program at the university. He also serves as a faculty advisor to the Black Student Union, which is very active at University of Toledo. And his community involvement is so extensive, either as an advisory member, board member, and founding member of a number of different organizations, including the Art Tatum African American Resource Center at the Public Library, Adrien Cole African American Oral History Collection, United Way of Greater Toledo's African American Leadership Council. He is a trustee member with the YMCA and with the Lower Midwest chapter of diversity officers in higher education. Past president of Central States Anthropological Society, and Dr. McArthur in 2014 was honored with the NCAA Division I Women's Basketball Volunteer of the Year Award. He was a recipient of an Outstanding Teacher Award in 2013. And I think that is Dr. McArthur's interesting fact. The NCAA Division I Women's Basketball Volunteer Award. That's phenomenal. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. McArthur. And we have Joel Dericio. Joel is a teaching professor at Bowling Green State University, but he is first and foremost an artist and a sculptor that is internationally recognized and a treasure to Ohio, the Toledo area, and Ohio in general. He received his MFA from New York State College of Ceramics. He opened His gallery in 1998 in Corning, New York, the glass capital, other than Toledo, sorry. His work has been represented in the International Exposition of Sculptural Objects. He has numerous works in public and private collections, including the Toledo Museum of Art, the Carnegie Museum of Art, and the Museum of American Glass. He's received numerous national awards, and through his, and in addition to all of this, with respect to women, he works very closely with the union, the American Association of University Professors, where he supports pay equity for faculty regardless of race, gender, or identity. His quote is, "I watched my mom struggle for professional recognition in the medical profession. I want my kids to grow up in a world where gender and identity do not to make sure that every faculty member has fair pay and an equal opportunity to advance professionally." So we are blessed and have the benefit of a really outstanding group of men who are going to share with us their observations about what HeForShe in 2020 means to each. And I'm going to ask Willie McCuther to come off of mute and take the floor and share your reflections on this day and this moment and what's resonant for you.
Sure. So first of all, so thank you, Leah, much for that great introduction, and for the Women of Toledo for inviting me to be a part of today's panel. Is indeed an honor. So, as I think about, what's happening in the world today and my passion and commitment to working with and for women, it goes back to my why. So what we didn't talk about in my bio is that, I was raised by a single mother, a single mother of 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls. And you can about imagine what that must have been like. My mother was not an educated woman. I think she completed the 12th grade probably. And so when she became a single mother, at the age of 40 something, with these 6 children, her job was to make sure that we were all fed and that we were well behaved, and as a single mother, trust me, she made sure that her boys were well behaved, and that was for sure. But so I watched her every day go to work. We were on welfare for maybe a couple of years, and at some point she made the decision that she didn't want her children to watch her to grow up in welfare. And so she then started working 2 jobs. She'd leave in the morning at 6:30 in the morning, come back at 3, half from 3 to 5, and then go to a second job from 5 to 9 in the evening. And that was what I knew. But I say that to say what that did for me, it gave me such an appreciation for the work of women. At the time, I didn't recognize it. She was just mom making sure that her kids were fed. But now as an adult looking back, I now understand her struggle of being in these various workplaces as a single mother, making sure her kids were fed. And so for me, I just have always, think back to things she taught us about respecting and loving everyone for who they are, regardless of where they come from. And so that's what I bring to work every day. And so now in this sort of pandemic, I'm really sympathetic and empathetic in understanding why the workplace needs to be a place that's flexible, has allowances, and does not penalize women for being the primary caregivers, of their household. Like right now on my team, for example, all of my leaders on my team, I have 6, of which 5 are women. And so for me, it's a no-brainer when they need to have accommodations to do something at home. It has to be done. And so as the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion here at the University of Toledo, that's part of the voice I bring to the senior leadership table, is this sense of equity. Thank you.
Thank you. I had trouble with my mute button there. Thank you so much, Dr. McCuther. And we're going to go to Joel next. So if you want to come off mute and share some reflections, that would be wonderful.
Well, thank you to all of you, and thank you for having me here today. I'd like to share that I'm also running for office. I'm running for state senate in Ohio's 2nd district, and I'm proud to be working with a matriot. I'm sharing the ticket with Nancy Larson in the Ohio House district, and each of the 3 House candidates that share my district are women. Working with Laurel Johnson and also working with Alexis Miller. So hopefully we're going to have strong equal representation in Columbus next year. But I also have a small connection to Owens Corning. I'm pleased to see so many Owens Corning people here because the main Corning was right across the river from my studio in Corning, New York. So I've talked to many of your scientists. I've been to many of the factories where you make glass, and even though I make art glass, I definitely have an interest in the industry. So when I was first talking to Sabrina, she asked me how I got interested, why I'm interested in women's issues. And, you know, of course I shared with her my mom's experience trying to be accepted in the medical field. And while that was challenging, that wasn't the first time I've seen her struggle. I'm going to go back a little bit further. When my mom became pregnant with me, she dropped out of school, and she dropped out to get her PhD instead of her MD, so that she could actually support my dad finishing his medical degree. And that set her back years, right? You know, he got his medical degree, he started working, she was a biochemist. And when I was about 10, I actually distinctly remember an argument downstairs. And I snuck down the stairs to hear what they were talking about. And I got there just in time to hear my mom say, I have to go back to school. I want to get my MD. And my dad was Italian and traditional, and he said, I make plenty of money. You don't have to go back to school. And neither of them had seen me at this point. And my mom said, if I don't go back to school, I'm going to kill one of the kids. And I snuck back upstairs because I was firmly convinced that I was the one she was going to kill. So she went back to school. She got her MD, she got her PhD, and she worked at the same university where my dad worked for decades. And there came a point where she was making 1/10 of the amount of money that he was making. And, you know, she had roughly the same position. She had more academic certification. She had more grants. And yet she was making a fraction what he was making. And I saw her struggle with that. She battled with her administrators. She battled directly with the university. And ultimately, she was able to get recognition and, you know, through her work, get the same pay that my dad was making. But that didn't come without a sacrifice. She stepped on some toes to make those changes. And while it was certainly possible for other women at the university to achieve advancement after her, it was very hard for her to advance at Ohio State. So I know that they've addressed many of these issues, but not all of them. When my mom wanted to move into administration in medicine, she had to search for years and years to find a university where she could become a chair or the head of a department. Ultimately, she went to Iowa State or Iowa University of Iowa. Sorry, I always get those mixed up. She went to the University of Iowa, where she became the chair of the Department of Oncology. So while this seemed normal to me, my mom is a brilliant scientist. She literally has found cures to cancer. And when I was 16, that did not seem that impressive to me. I thought lots of people use words like lyophilizer at the dinner table. But now in retrospect, I realize how amazing my mom is. She's worked with pediatric oncology, developed cures for certain types of leukemia, half a dozen other types of cancer. And, you know, she saves lives. So the fact that she was almost held back because my dad didn't want her to have to make a living was wrong. She's an amazing person in her own right. She's contributed heavily to the advancement of science throughout her career. And right now, even as she is thinking about retiring, she's managing a grant with 40 labs across the country that is researching the best type of treatment for, I'm afraid I can't remember the type of cancer it is. But you know, when she's done, when she's retired, she will have had more than 40 continuous years of being funded by the NIH. There's amazing research that wouldn't have been possible without her, and women's careers that were able to advance. And they're never going to know that she was the one who fought for them. And it's inspiring and it's intimidating. And that's why I'm doing some of the work that I'm doing. I don't know the answers. I don't know how to help all women, but I know that the work that I'm doing for my union is helping women. It's helping people of color. It's women who are in unions make closer to parity in their pay with men. People of color who are in unions make closer to parity in their pay with white people. And it's without prescribing the answer, I know that I'm able to do work that helps people. It helps me, it helps all of my peers, and it disproportionately helps women and people of color. And I'm satisfied with that. So for 10 years, I've been doing that work for the union. And most recently, I decided that I'm running for office. So my work with the union, we were able to bring about market adjustments that directly raised the pay of women who were underpaid based on the field that they were in. We were able to get parental leave, and not just maternity leave, but parental leave, so that we recognize men's role in raising a family and participating in responsibilities at home. So, I know that by working together in the union, we were able to make changes that weren't possible working as individuals. And that inspired me. I want to go to Columbus and do the same work. I want to raise minimum wage, which I know is going to disproportionately aid women, single mothers in particular. It's going to raise families out of poverty because people will be making a dignified living wage. I want to write laws that are going to recognize the disproportionate impact that this COVID crisis has had on women. More women are dropping out of the workforce right now to help their kids go through school, to make sure that the home life is taken care of. That burden should not fall solely on women. We have a crumbling infrastructure for dealing with early childhood care. So we need to make sure that as a state and as a community, we're making sure that kids have the care they need, that kids can get early childhood and pre-kindergarten programs, and so that women don't have to give up their careers in order to raise their families. That was something that my mom struggled with 50 years ago, and it's terrible that we're still struggling with that issue today. So I want to make sure that every person in Ohio has an equal opportunity. And although I don't have the answers myself, I know that by working together, we can find a better way. Thank you.
Thank you for that. you know, I was listening to you tell your mother's story, and one, I wish she could be here with you. It'd be wonderful to see her. But the other thing that I was remembering the quote, well-behaved women rarely make history. And that sounds like the embodiment of your mother. So thank you for sharing that story. And it's so important for us to hear those stories, what women, you know, in generations before ours went through, and, you know, the sacrifices and the setbacks that come along with taking those kinds of stands. So I really appreciate it. But let's go to Dr. Rieger. So if you want to come off mute, we'd love to listen to you for a little while.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you, Sabrina and Nina, for inviting me. It's great to be here with Women of Toledo. You know, Willie and Joel and even Kim from the Matriots, you know, touch base on this idea of the importance of empowerment for women, and also raising the profile of women in the political arena. But it seems like the first thing we need to do is to make sure that women are physically and emotionally safe in their own homes. So one of the core strategic pillars of UN Women's strategic plan is to eliminate gender violence. So my segment here, what I'd like to do is talk about the Bethany House, which is a local agency that provides hope and life-giving support to women who are escaping abusive situations. And just right out of the gate, I'll just let you know, I'm not an expert on domestic violence. In my previous life as a school principal and as a superintendent, obviously I interacted and had to get involved in family abuse and neglect situations. But it was 5 years ago when I joined the Bethany House that my understanding and perspective was extremely expanded on this idea of domestic violence. And as I joined as a board member, and really it was what I have learned from the executive director, Deidre Lashley, the president, Devonna Smith, the staff of the Bethany House, and the survivors themselves that have been transforming to me. And I'll talk about that at the end. But let me just frame in some graphic terms domestic violence. So domestic violence can take the form of physical abuse, psychological, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and financial abuse. The main red flag traits of an abuser are intimidation, coercion, and control. An abuser seeks to control their partner by all means conceivable. Annually in the United States, there are 10 million adults that experience domestic violence. And notice I said adults because men are victims of domestic violence, but obviously women are predominantly the victims, and that's my frame of reference for today. Domestic violence is the leading cause of injury for women, and to domestic hotline across the United States, 20,000. That figure stuns me. And then also 10 million children experience or witness domestic violence in their homes. Last year in 2019 in the state of Ohio, there were 109 women murdered due to domestic violence. In Toledo, over the last 10 years, there have been 53 women that have been murdered. And if you read the Blade this morning, on the front page of the second section, there was a story about Melissa Shoup. And a year ago yesterday, Melissa Shoup was killed by her on the porch of her mom's house. So last night they had a vigil in her name. So just today, it connects with our conversation here. And then finally, Sabrina, you mentioned about the impact of COVID. It's impacted everyone, but you can imagine the impact to women and children that are in a abusive situation with the quarantining, the closer quarters. So the risk level has increased for women in those situations. So those are some pretty grim points of reference. So we need some hope, right? And the Bethany House is that beacon of hope. And just some background, Bethany House was started 35 years ago by the Sisters of St. Francis. And the Sisters of St. Francis are the same wonderful people that started Lourdes University back in 1958. The sisters are 24/7 doers of good. They're tremendous people. The Bethany House is funded through private foundations, private donations, grants, and also in-kind services. On an annual basis, Bethany House serves approximately 30 women and their children, and the average stay for survivors at Bethany House is 15 months. The mission is to empower survivors and their children to regain control of their lives. And they do that by providing transitional housing that is safe and therapeutic. Safety is a #1 priority. They also do it by ensuring that they have services and resources to regain control of their lives. And then in the delivery of the accommodations, the services, and programs, it's wrapped in dignity and respect, because the women that are in Bethany House have not experienced dignity and respect for a long time. In fact, they're traumatized by what they experienced. The tagline for the mission statement is safety, empowerment, and hope. And those three things describe what everyone associated at Bethany House is trying to accomplish for the survivors and the children there. The services, the transitional housing is really there to give women a chance to heal physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The facility is at an undisclosed location, meaning if you donate money, it's to a P.O. box. All of us that work and support Bethany House sign confidentiality agreements so we don't reveal the location. And that's obvious, right? Women, even if there's protective orders or if their exes are on parole or probation, some might be in jail, that doesn't mean that they don't want to re-engage and try to control and maybe even abuse again. So safety is first. So the facility is at a confidential location, and it's apartment style living. And that's a really important differentiator than some other domestic violence shelters. And they do a great job also. But there's 1 or 2 or 3 bedroom apartment structures. And in my 5 years, there's been 2 women that have brought 5 children into Bethany House. And so those 3 bedroom apartments are really important. And just having a place to call home and to heal is significantly important part of the process. And most women, they do stay for 15 months, maybe even longer. Other domestic violence shelters use a 30 or 60-day limit, so that's a differentiator. And it's apartment living versus dormitory living. And even after 18 months or even 2 years, if women don't feel comfortable being totally on their own, there is low-cost housing at the Bethany House where there is just minimal rent and women can continue their services. While women are at and children are at Bethany House, there are a bevy of services that they get: crisis intervention, counseling, daycare, legal assistance, victim rights advocacy. There's all kinds of training and investment in the women as far as life skills and job skills, financial literacy, parenting classes, relationship management. And the one aspect that was really interesting that was hidden for me, a lot of things were hidden for me about domestic violence, was transportation. Because one of the controlling aspects that an abuser often does is prevent women from driving, either from getting their license or access to a car. So many of the women arrive without vehicles. And with vehicles, there's freedom. And so the Bethany House works either through public transportation, but they also have a car program, meaning if women need a car and they meet certain criteria as far as things that they've achieved on their own, there's a private donor that buys women of Bethany House a car. And there's a dealer, I forget what the dealer is, there's a car dealer down in Bowling Green that picks out cars for women and gives it a cost and makes sure that it's a great car. And when the women get these cars, it's another just another vehicle or another avenue for freedom. And all these services are free to the women of Bethany House. So a lot of great therapeutic things for the women there, but there's also a lot of advocacy that Deidre, the executive director, and board members do. A lot of collaborations with other community social service agencies, because Bethany House can't do it all by themselves, because the complexity of the women's lives and the problems that everyone needs to help sort through, it takes a lot of different agencies. And Deidre's also very involved with law enforcement, because obviously law enforcement are typically the first ones on the scene for a domestic violence issue. And so just increasing law enforcement's knowledge of domestic situation. And also on the legislative front, what's been incredible to learn is that some of the minimum sentencing for domestic violence is really, really low. And so significant lobbying is to make sure that what is given, their crimes, when these crimes are committed, that the appropriate sentences are given out. Right now, there's a bill in the Senate, it's called Aisha's Law. It went flying through the House of Representatives, now in the Senate, and it's to make sure that strangulation is considered a lethal event, and it's treated so when it comes to sentencing. And there's also some additional requirements for law enforcement when they're interviewing a woman that's been a part of a domestic violence situation. And then probably the biggest, I guess, community awareness is a Silent Witness Project. And that is an annual event where women that have been murdered in Northwest Ohio, those 53 that I mentioned, their life stories are told by a loved one or a close friend. There's an actual wood figurine of the 53 women plus a plaque, and there's a veil over them, and then there's an unveiling, and then the person that's close to them reads something about that person who was murdered and then how they were murdered. And it's an incredible, moving event. It's incredibly moving. And this year, obviously, because of COVID, in October is Domestic Violence Month, Preventing Domestic Violence Month. And it's online. Bethany House Facebook is featuring the silent witness people that are being memorialized. And then on the 27th at 7 p.m., there'll be a moment of silence via Facebook. So it's been a transforming aspect for me. And I was pretty in tune to a lot of things because of my role in education, and education being a predominantly a female profession. So I kind of thought of myself as being pretty in tune. But my 5 years thus far, it has really moved me to try to grow in different areas and try to use my platform and skill set to help with further these issues. And so I kind of have two goals. It's to continue to support Bethany House and the good works that they're doing, and what Deidre and that Deidre and her team are doing, and also trying to bring additional resources. But then the second thing, my goal is I need to talk to men about this. Just about everyone here is women, right? And you've either experienced mistreatment or some type of violence. And so you get this. You don't need to really hear me say this, but it's important for men to hear me say this, and for me to encourage men to always look for ways to respect and value women, and more importantly, to call out men for the misbehavior or for the crimes or whatever. So I haven't figured that out, but that's one of my goals. And let me just leave you with this: as far as leadership, I kind of view myself as a kind of a student of leadership. I'm not an expert, but I read everything. I observe leaders in action. And I'm always looking for insights. But the two, Deidre Lashley, the executive director, and Devonna Smith, the president of Bethany House, have been incredibly inspiring to me. I mean, Deidre she's an expert in this field. She has the strength of character. She has a fierce conviction to help women that are struggling to escape this horrific life situation. And really key is that she has a collaborative leadership style. She knows she has a finite budget and resources. The complexity of domestic violence requires everyone to help, and she has the leadership skills to make everyone come together and to benefit the women of Bethany House. So Deidre is an incredible leader. And then Devonna, her life story is incredible. She's a academic advisor at Bowling Green State University. She's getting her doctorate. People that viewed Bethany House from the eyes of a child. Her mom was abused and fled the abuser and took Devonna and her brother, and they went to Bethany House. And so she lived through that abusive situation as a child and saw that the Bethany House provided life and a second chance for her family. And so since then, she's been heavily involved. So when Devonna gets up and speaks, it is a pin drop. And so I'm talking about domestic violence, but I'm also talking about leadership and women just blazing a trail. And so I'm thankful for what I've learned so far in the next 5 years. I hope to use my platform to help with women's issues, specifically domestic violence, but I'm extremely thankful that I have someone like Deidre Lashley and Devonna to very much be a mentor and inspiration to me. So, Leah, that's.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, this is this brings me to a question that I want to address to the three of our panelists. But also, this is now a time for you to put your questions in the chat. Sabrina is eagerly awaiting to pitch them out to me. But I do want to get your feedback from all of this. This question of how do you encourage men to be allies? How do you use your role, your status as a man in the world to engage, have the conversation with other men to encourage them to be allies to women? And I'm going to let Dr. Rieger catch his breath for a minute, but you know, but I invite you to speak up and let's talk about that a little bit, because I assume it's not easy, but I think it's really important.
So I'll jump in initially if that's okay. You know, it's not a difficult conversation to have. You know, it's not difficult because for me it's not because I know it's the right thing to do. And so we have these conversations quite often. To be quite frank with you, I think you mentioned, Leah, in introduction about a group that I helped to start called Brothers in the Rise. And that's an organization of male faculty and staff at the university. And quite often on a Friday, you know, we'll start off the conversation about our need to support women, and as men to stand up and be men and to support women at the university. And so once that sort of comment is made, then around the table, we just go around, well, virtually now, and talk about, things that we need to do in terms of being good, strong allies, such as no matter what meeting that we're in, making sure that there is representation at the table. And I think maybe Brad mentioned this, and helping to ensure that I guess what's this idea of mansplaining, that, a woman says something, then all of a sudden the man has to go back and explain it again, and to call that kind of stuff out, and so I've now, so we talk about being courageous, being a courageous ally. And so I think that's a conversation that I have with the men in my circle about, being courageous allies and about calling stuff out, not allowing men to silence women's voices. I can give you one example. There's a colleague here, she came to my office, we had a senior leadership team meeting, and she came in tears and said, one of the men told me I should stay in my place. And right away, I'm like, who was it? Because I go right into this mode. I get it. I don't need to defend women. I get that women can defend themselves, but I just can't tolerate men who act like bullies. And so it's that kind of stuff that I think that men need to sort of be courageous and be bold and unapologetic in the ways in which they advocate for women. And so that's the kind of conversation I have with the men in my circle. And now they get it. And to be quite frank with you, I am so eager now to take this concept of HeForShe back to that group, with the permission, of course, with Women of Toledo, and saying, look, let's make sure that we implement this conversation and have an ongoing conversation at the university and other circles as well.
Well, I think there's a pledge opportunity that Women of Toledo can probably distribute and share at your organization. And thank you for that. Joel, what are your thoughts?
I'd like to speak to it first on a personal level and then on a level of action. So Dr. McKether was talking about it's not a difficult conversation to have, and I agree with that. The part that was difficult for me was actually listening. So a lot of times I hear the words, but it took me a long time to understand fully what I was hearing. And I will say that the challenge for me has been, there's a certain level of patience and strength that's required to have the conversation. So my first reaction is to do something about it, but I don't have the answers. So the patience is learning how to listen and hear the conversation that's actually happening instead of what I want to hear. The strength is the strength to accept the information that I'm hearing without trying to fix things. So, my solution is a solution that I would come up with as a man. And what really needs to happen is I need to be patient enough to hear the solution of women that are in my community and in my professional circles, and then support the decisions that they've made. So now, on a professional level, how we deal with that in the union is by surveying all of our members. So we actually make sure that before we sit down at the negotiating table, before we start writing those changes into the contract, what we do is we make sure that we're actually solving problems that our members have. So what we have found is sometimes just bringing your pay up to market is not an adequate solution. We found that women tend to be more often in non-tenure track positions. Women tend to be more often in fields that are underpaid to begin with. So if you bring them up to average of their field, you're still underpaid. So, solutions that on the surface seem just fine don't always address the real problem. And it's my obligation to listen long enough to hear what the real problem is and be patient enough for the real solution to present itself so that I can be a real advocate.
I appreciate your thoughts about listening. That's something that's, I think I think sometimes women feel like we're always reminding men of the importance of that listening. You know, I was in a, you know, Dr. McCaffrey, you talked about mansplaining, and, you know, we've been talking about mansplaining for years, right? And it was several months ago, I was in a conversation and I witnessed it, and I thought, you know, and with, you know, very professional people, and I thought I'd gone down the rabbit hole, and I said, are we having this conversation again? And I had to say, okay, I need you to listen to me for a minute. And it ended well and fine, but it seems as though we have to keep talking about these things. That it's never one and done. And I think you learn, I'm certainly learning that in my role that I've been in for a year. Nothing about diversity and inclusion is one and done. And you know, issues with women in the workplace and power and status, never one and done. Brad, did you have some thoughts? And I'm wondering, as an educator in K-12, if you have any observations about students, or students or teachers and issues in that community, as well as anything else you'd like to share.
Sure, Lee. I mean, just piggybacking on Willie's comment about stepping in and coaching up men when you see stereotypes perpetuated about women or bias, known or unknown. I think that's really important, Willie. I think you're spot on about that. And if we're truly allies for women, we do that. We should do that. And be a kind of disruptor, interrupter of inappropriate behavior. And then, you know, Joel comment about listening, that we all can do better on that. And even, I mean, for myself, I mean, the greatest compliment we can give each other is just to listen intently, right? I think, and again, this is a general, I'll just speak for myself. At times I'll be in meetings and I'll be trying to take charge, and I won't listen. And at times maybe even my body language will be dismissive to a female, and it wasn't intentional, but it can be damaging. And so, you know, walking the talk, you know, make our words and our actions matter as senior leaders. And so that's the first thing. You know, and I really like the Ruth Bader Ginsburg's quote. I think I got it. Like, women need to be in all the places where decisions are being made. And I think if we really want gender balance, we have to fully embrace that. And back to K, I mean, I've been away from K-12 schools for a while, Leah, but I find that the kids these days are much more in tune to the gender balance and inclusivity, and just that's the way it should be. Should treat people equally. Women, people of different race, different ethnicities, people with disabilities. Kids are very accepting of that, more accepting than maybe that I remember when I was going through school.
Thanks for that. I tend to feel similarly, and not just because I have 2 young children that I think are awesome, or young adults-ish that I think are awesome, but it's I do think that this generation is different. And I'm going to throw a question out to the room and invite you to chat. And that is, what do you think about this generation of young people and their awareness of gender equity and gender equality and the importance? I'm curious as to your perspective, and if anybody has a comment, I would love to have you come off mute and share. I think in so many ways we're doing what we're doing for ourselves, but we're also doing it for our daughters and for our sons, in every way. So I would love to talk about that and talk a little bit about what they need from us as we go forward with this work. So I'm going to pause for a little bit. I know I just dropped that, but I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about that. And Dr. McCuther, I know you work with the next generation every day, so I'm going to rely on you to share some comments. But I would love to hear from the room as well.
So look, I'm happy to kick this one off.
Okay, great.
So I'll tell you, I am. So we know in looking at students who are going to college that we now have a generation of students who are the most activist minded that we've ever had. We have students now who demand to be heard, and they demand action on top of it. I'm so excited about that because for me, it's a double-edged sword. I've been saying for the past couple of years to our students, I need you all to be excited about something. Get ticked off and protest. Now, the other side of that, when they protest, I've got to deal with it. But I think now that they're in this mindset of we want to see change happen, and so when our students protest, I'm out there with them, not to protest, but to protect them as an administrator. And I think what they expect from us, they expect two things. They expect leaders to listen to what they have to say, and they expect leaders then to take action. I think our students today, they can see someone who's full of hot air in a minute. They know who's real, who's not real. They know somebody who's going to take action. And so I think what they expect, they don't expect leaders, they don't expect the adults, if you will, to be passive. If you're passive to this generation, then it's almost like you're useless. And so, and I said it very respectfully, organizations, and we're not all able to take the kinds of actions that these young people expect. So when I say young people, I'm talking about students, but also even our younger workers. We now have workers who are coming in. They're now asking questions about diversity, about inclusivity. They're asking questions about equity. And I think it matters a lot to them. And for organizations who are not willing to address those critical issues will not end up employing, they may end up potentially losing some of their best people.
Thank you.
I'm going to address that on a little bit more personal level. My daughter's 17, and last year, her and Mary, my wife, were having a deep discussion about trans issues. And I think that the gender is not as clear as it was when I was in high school. So my daughter and my wife were fighting for several weeks, because my wife is an old school feminist, and she was mad. She's like, I don't want some dude just saying he's a woman and then taking the rights that I've been fighting hard for my whole life. And my daughter said, that's not what it's about. It's that, they have an identity inside that's different than who they are. And I'm going to confess that I split the difference a little bit. I took my daughter aside and I said, look, are you not? I'm going to let you fight it out because you're moving out in 2 years and I'm living with her forever. But that's only kind of funny. The truth of the matter is, you can't separate women's issues from diversity issues. And, you know, we need to understand that there is now, the next generation has an expanded understanding of what gender is. It's going to have to include a non-binary gender formula, and we need to make sure that we are fighting for equity for everyone who's in the system. And it does become, it can become balkanized, it can become tangled sometimes, but we need the patience and the understanding to be willing to unravel those threads, find out how we can help everyone. And you know, the big word I heard earlier was inclusion. So the laws can make sure that we have diversity, but inclusion is a personal thing, and we need to make sure that once we have a school and a workplace and a community that has everyone in it, that everyone can participate equally, and that's the inclusion part.
Thank you for that. Any other thoughts? And then I'm going to go to a couple of things in the chat. No? Okay. So Holly, and if Holly wants to come off and elaborate further, she can, or not. But she said it's important to also elevate and promote men who are good fathers, parents, and supporters of women in the workplace. This makes the bullies less powerful. We have a family-first philosophy at work that applies to men and women equally who are caring for children and elderly parents. You know, one of the things I think is important about that is the understanding that family leave or parental leave is not just parity for men, it actually helps women. It actually helps women because it places men in that position of caregiver and pulls some of the onus, as well as driving some of the cultural shift in thinking that we need to have. But I think that's incredibly important.
And that's, Leah, exactly what I was trying to say, is I do think, you know, that we need to empower men in the workplace in non-traditional views of power. In other words, you know, discouraging, you know, that, you know, strong buck leadership as the only way to lead, you know, and respecting men and women equally, making sure that men feel comfortable having to leave to take care of a child because their wife has a meeting that day or something else, and, you know, creating that balance. I'm fortunate at Cooper Smith, it is that way. We do have our CEO, Jim Cooper, always says, you know, work matters, but family matters more. So kind of integrating family into the workplace and making that a real conversation is very, very important. And, you know, we are fortunate to have that at Cooper Smith.
So if I may, so, you know, I think what we're talking about in general here is a fundamental cultural shift in the workplace, you know, and I think, you know, that kind of transformation is absolutely what's necessary to attract and to retain good talent, because the old way of doing things just don't work, you know, and of course we all have those folks who've been around for 30, 40 years. This is how we've always done it. And that kind of mindset just doesn't work. It just can't work in today's workplace. And so being innovative, being creative, you know, and doing what's right. I think the easiest part about this really is just doing what's right, you know, and making sure that gets codified into policies and into procedures.
Well, I think that it's really timely that we're having this conversation because I don't know, and you're going to have to forgive my little mutt in there. McKinsey released a study a couple of weeks ago that outlined the risk that we have of losing so many of the gains that we've made with women in the workplace through the COVID she-cession, and the need for flexibility, the need for rethinking how we work, where we work, is incredibly important. And to the degree that if one of the things that we all take away from this is the need to check in with our organizations and have those conversations, whether they're organizations, philanthropic organizations, education, our workplaces, is to check in and saying, what's going on with your women, because women are self-selecting out of the workforce at a rate that we have just not seen. And it's been something that has been keeping me awake at night and been on my mind as a inclusion and diversity professional, because when I read that report and I saw what's at stake here, it really frightened me. I don't know if anybody has looked at that or what they're seeing externally in your own organization, but I'd love to have a little bit of a conversation about that before we break up, and I think we have to in the next few minutes.
Leah, I haven't read the McKinsey report, but I can tell you at Cooper Smith, as Holly framed really well, we are very family friendly, relationship based, know that people have lives outside of work. We have to meet the needs of the clients. We have to be profitable, all those things. But there's bigger things, more important things than what we're doing at work. And so we do convey that, and we provide the flexibility. But in my check-ins with our staff, the stress is palpable that people are experiencing, especially women. Even with the maximum flexibility that we are granting, it is tough. And I do see it in the men, and the men are helping with that stressful situation at home. And a lot of it is due to schools being on hybrid formats or online. If you have kids, K-12 kids, or even college kids home from school, the stress in the house is significant, and it impacts ability to do work, but there's just all those dynamics. So those are that's real. So I don't know what's in that report, but it's falling on women. It is falling on women. Even in the best work scenarios, it's still falling on women disproportionately.
The fact that you acknowledge that is really great, despite everything that you're doing under the best of circumstances. And for many of us, we are under the best of circumstances, yep, because most of us are professionals and have the ability to be to do productive work at home. But the point that you raised around stress, I saw a lot of nodding heads. And I would say if there's, if I've got a second and a third, I've got the election, but the third thing on my mind as it relates to the workplace would probably be burnout and fatigue. And I'd love to hear some thoughts about what you're seeing and and if anybody has any great solutions, frankly, because I think all companies who care are starting to see this and are starting to think about it.
So I'd like to speak to this a little bit. So I also have not read the report, but what you're saying makes perfect sense. We have neglected socially in our nation an understanding of the requirement for early childhood care. So there's an unspoken assumption that taking care of the kids is women's work. We've been devaluing that early childhood education and early childhood care, and it makes men underpaid, first of all, but it also makes it difficult to re-enter the workforce. So if you have a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, very few men are going to be willing to stay home and be house dad instead of house mom. And so we need to invest in early childhood care in our state and in our country. We need to re-envision what that is, because we can't have 15 or 30 kids in a classroom anymore with COVID going on. We need to make sure that that child care is distributed within a family, but also appreciated, and the value of that's recognized in our society. So how do we have a 3-year-old and let both parents work? How do we safely have childcare situation with COVID where we are not exposing the childcare providers and the kids themselves to unnecessary risk? Nobody's addressed that. And so, of course, that burden is falling heaviest on women right now. And really, most likely, women in low-wage jobs. So it's falling disproportionately right now, and we need to recognize that. And as we're writing legislation to deal with those issues, we need to make sure that that conversation is engaged.
Thank you for that. I think we're probably going to have to wrap it up here, but I want to thank everybody for letting me spend some time with you today. I hold, we call them courageous conversations, but they're really listening sessions to talk about what's on people's minds. And sometimes we focus them on a particular topic: allyship, race, back to school, in COVID, a number of things. And one of the things that we always get to is give yourself and give somebody else a little bit of grace, because everybody's feeling the pinch, some more than others, and you never know what somebody's grappling with in a given moment. But to also keep pushing, and it's groups like this that provide some of that fuel to keep women and the men who support them driving progress. So I'm going to give this back to Sabrina, and again, with gratitude, and thank you for spending some time with you today, letting me do that.
And thank you, Leah. Thank you, Brad, Willie, and Joel. I feel actually really blessed to have gotten to know you throughout this process, and I hope I can continue to get to know you and the great allies you are for this mission. I have 2 young boys, and so my one wish for them is to see them on panels like this, just like you are doing when they get older. So I really appreciate your partnership. I do want to leave everyone, I've been taking some notes, but as we think about calls to action, how can I, have an impact when I get off of this call? Things I heard were, don't be afraid to call others out, be bold and unapologetic. I really liked that positioning, Willie, and how you advocate for others. I do want to say, this topic can be uncomfortable for us, right? But I had someone once told me to learn. So I like to think of it as, instead of walking away from something that I'm uncomfortable with, it means there's work to do there that will have a good outcome. There was also listening, and I have taken this to heart, I'd say probably in the last year or two, that we think we always have to be moving forward with action, but listening can be really powerful to drive your awareness so that you know how to appropriately take those actions. Keep talking. It's never one and done. I think in all the groups that we're becoming a part of in our workplaces and communities, it's all about continuing that conversation to build a muscle on how we be better going forward. I also heard, I love the comment, I think, Holly, that you made about promoting men who are taking those non-traditional choices and make them okay and make them standards, so that happens more in the workplaces. So I do want to specifically also, in the 3 minutes we have left, to see more engagement in the HeForShe platform in the Toledo community. sorry, husband can't chat right now. And with those of you on the call or people you might know who you think are doing good work and advocating for women in our community, there's information on our website, but we'll send that to you as well. Thank you to the Matriots, to Kim for your partnership, amazing work you're doing in the community, and then to the women at Women of Toledo, Nina and Christina, thank you for everything you do every day and for giving me the opportunity to be a part of it. So I really appreciated it. Hopefully all of you got something out of this conversation to take with you as you move forward.